There was high drama in Belgium, but for once not involving McLaren. Race winner George Russell saw his victory expunged from the record books, meaning that Oscar Piastri moved up to P2 after another excellent race, while another poor Lando Norris start meant he had to settle for P5. To break down all the action, I'm joined by two F1 journalists, Magdalena Put and Esha Azeem, so let's get straight into it. Okay, so I've got the pair of them joining me now. First of all, Esha, coming to you. How are you doing? You're coming for us from the US, so I presume it's very early over there for you.
Yeah, it's not too early. It's around 2 p.m. here, but
Okay.
I'm doing fine. Thanks so much for having me on today. I'm excited.
No worries, you're very welcome. And Magdalena, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, thank you.
Glad. Let's get straight into the race then. Obviously, quite a good race in the end. Now, before we get to Isha's and Magdalena's thoughts, here's what Oscar had to say after the race.
Pretty happy on the whole. I think it was a really well executed race. I think, clearly the one stop was a possibility, and I think probably there's a lot of people out there kicking themselves they didn't consider it more. But no, I think we executed a great race. Had a quick car, and ultimately just didn't put it in the right position in qualifying yesterday. So I think, given where we started, very happy. But ultimately, I think there was a bit more potential this weekend.
We've probably got to preface this going into this. I'm sure everyone listening has already seen or heard that obviously race winner George Russell was disqualified. Obviously, this isn't a Mercedes podcast, so we're not going to go fully into that, but it does have effects on both Lando and Oscar. So for Oscar, it means moving up to P3 after moved up to P2. Sorry, after starting for finishing in P3. Lando, meanwhile, goes into P5. So some more points for the boys. For this episode, we're going to split the drivers. Sometimes we do talk about it at the same time, but it seems easier this time round to speak about the drivers individually. So we're going to start with Oscar. I'll give you a little rundown of his race to begin with. Started in the medium, as all the drivers did. A good start again from Oscar, not something we've seen quite often from him. Couldn't get past Hamilton and Perez, who were fighting, but by lap 5, he was past Perez. Pitted lap 12 and had a very quick 2-second stop onto the hards. And then sort of the race progressed, and it was a bit towards the end where Oscar came in very hot, came in quite hard into the front jack, hit the guy and got a 4.4 second stop, which proved to be quite consequential going into the final race. So, Isha, I'll come to you. Let's go overall on Oscar's race. How did you think he drove in Spa?
I think it was a great race from him. I think he did a great job. He had a good start as well, and then carried it throughout till the end as well. I think that at the end, he was very close to potentially getting a win, especially given George Russell's disqualification. But I guess we will talk about that a little bit later. But overall, I think it was a really good drive from him, and I think he is really showing all his potential.
Yeah, Magdalena, what did you make of it? Because I think for me, looking at it, I think it was. I'm going to say it was one of probably Oscar's best races in F1, which sounds weird because obviously he's won a race before, he's had such great performances, but this one, I mean, if you're watching the broadcast and if you're watching along, like it never really seemed like he was in it for a chance of victory till right at the end. He suddenly appeared, and what did you make of his performance? It seemed like a very mature performance, one where he knew that the race was going to come to him rather than having to chase it.
Yeah. I think I think here and in Hungary, he's really been kind of finding his rhythm and coming into his own. Um, you mentioned the race start. He got the race start right, and Lando didn't. So he capitalized there already. And yeah, he kept his cool, like you said, throughout the race, and it was a mature performance from him.
Yeah, let's talk about what more he could have done then, really, because I think he had pretty much the perfect drive until that one moment, didn't he? So, like, it's a rare mistake we saw from him, but he came in very hot to the pit lane, overstepped his mark, which doesn't sound like a huge thing in F1, but I mean, if you see the practice that the guys do, they're doing it at such a specific point. They're taking the wheel off where they expect it to be, and the drivers have to pretty much stop on that center. And the poor front jack guy took quite a whack, didn't he, from catching Oscar's car. How big of an impact do you think that had on Oscar's race? And do you think maybe he could have won it if it wasn't for that one moment?
Um, I mean, good work from the front jack
Yeah.
to catch that. I I don't know. I mean, if he could have won it, maybe not necessarily. I think in his post-race interviews, he said that they should have maybe considered the one stop more, because what George did was, I don't think anyone really expected that. So maybe not necessarily a win, but it would have helped him. I think he said he lost the most time stuck behind Charles for those couple of laps. So if he had less of a gap there, um, to close, and then he could have gotten Hamilton. So it did cost him, but I'm not sure if it cost him a win necessarily.
I think, yeah, you're very much right to pick up on that point. And I think another point that Oscar made himself was that being in the clean air was so important to him. He said he gained like a second a lap every time he did clean air, which he wasn't in clean air very often. I mean, as we said, he had a great start, but then he was stuck behind the front runners, and like you said, he had Leclerc later on. Like, Isha, do you think? Do you think a couple more laps he could have maybe caught this Mercedes? I mean, it was a very hard track to overtake, as we saw of Landa. We'll talk about later on. Like, he didn't manage to get too many overtakes done. If the race is a few laps longer, considering how long Spa is, it's a 7 kilometer track. They're very long laps. Do you think a win was possible, or do you think the fact that Merck had two drivers up there made it against Oscar going into that?
That's a very difficult question to answer. It's certainly something to ponder about. I think that an extra few laps, it may have helped him, it may not have, because, as you mentioned, Lewis Hamilton, George Russell were definitely going at it. I think that if there were a few more laps, maybe Hamilton would have tried to go around Russell, and that could have potentially ended up in one of them going off track, giving Oscar the advantage. But I just didn't see it playing out, even if we had extra few laps. I think it would have been a little too difficult around Spa.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think when we saw Hamilton approaching Russell, I think everyone sort of assumed that Mercedes was going to tell Russell to get out of the way, but he
Hmm.
very much didn't. He held on. Do you think the one stop? I mean, obviously, it's quite an unusual race where it's only Russell pretty much in the top 10, top whatever it is, that went on the one stop and managed to make it work. Magdalena, do you think McLaren could have maybe split their strategies? I mean, there was slight variations, but they were both quite similar, both two stops. Do you think maybe they were just a bit surprised by the conditions, by the elements?
Yeah, definitely. I think again, I think in one of his interviews, Oscar did admit to considering it, but he said that maybe they didn't consider it seriously enough. Um, I think a lot of the front runners were surprised. I think Leclerc made similar comments that they could have made the one stop work, but before George actually put his foot down and decided, hey, let's try this. I don't think the others actually considered it. I think they thought it would be too much of a risk. So, but it could have worked. I think they were surprised that the deg on the hards wasn't as high as they expected it to be, and I think they could have tried it with Oscar, especially since he was leaning towards that strategy himself.
As for going on a one stop, here's what Oscar said about that possible strategy choice.
Um, it did cross my mind, but not seriously enough. Um, I was amazed at how much difference the dirty air made today. I think when Lewis and Charles pitted for the second stop, I think I went like 1 second faster, just because I had clean air. So that was impressive. But then it felt like it kind of degged a little bit again after that point, and with 16 laps I think it was, or 15 laps around Spa, it felt like a pretty big risk to try and go to the end. And I knew that even with the tire advantage that we were building up, that we had a strong chance to try and win the race anyway that way. So yeah, maybe we should have considered the one stop a little bit more, but I think with the two stop, I think we did a good job of capitalizing on it. Just unfortunately, on my side, didn't give us the track position in qualifying.
I think a lot of the drivers themselves thought the tire deg was a lot less, and it's not often in modern F1 that strategists get sort of stumped by a track, but this is quite interesting to see only Russell doing that, opting for that strategy. Ultimately, obviously, it didn't pay out for Russell because obviously, unfortunately, had a disqualification. His car was underweight according to the stewards. What that means is another great result, even better result for Oscar up into P2. And I wanted to ask, sort of, he's had such a good run of races now. I mean, we've spoken a lot about on this podcast about him not quite having the luck. I mean, he's had a few situations like Silverstone where maybe the decisions haven't gone his way, and yet finally something's clicked, hasn't it, Isha? Like, he's the last few races, he's really sort of hit his stride. Like, obviously, won in Hungary, looked incredibly good there, and now he's coming to this race and looks really good again. Like, going into the summer break, when we're talking about momentum and talking about the drivers in McLaren, do you think it's actually Oscar who's more informed than Lando currently? I mean, I know it's a very small sample size, and Lando's got quite a big lead in the standings. But just judging of the last few races, it really seems like Oscar's the informed driver, doesn't it?
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I usually do tend to side with Lando when it comes to the debate between Lando and Oscar. I just think that, he's got a little more experience, he's performing better, but the past few races have really proven how talented Oscar is. And especially with his one in Hungary, it at the end it was a little bit overshadowed by the mistake that McLaren made as a team, but from the start he had the better start compared to Lando, and then he carried that for the next several laps. And then even today's race, he performs better than Lando. And I think that he's just gotten this confidence the past few races. He's developed it over time. And I think it's definitely going to give him the momentum going forward. Which, when you look at Oscar, he's got a very quiet, calm personality. And you don't really associate him with a lot of energy and excitement going into, the second half of the season. But this confidence he's developed over the past few races, I think is definitely going to give him the momentum to go forward. And, I think this might be a little too optimistic, but I think we could even see him getting a potential second win before the end of this season.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. That seems like a very good prediction. I mean, before the season, I predicted McLaren to get P2, and like that's becoming more and more real as the weeks go on. Just on Oscar, he moves up to P4 now, overtakes Carlos Sainz. I think that in itself is remarkable. A year and a half into his F1 career. Looking ahead, Magdalena, sort of his second half of the season, like we mentioned there, sort of wins are a possibility. Like, what should Oscar be targeting for the remaining race this season? Because obviously he's a bit out of the way for the title race. I don't think anyone's sort of considering him for the title race. Obviously, maybe McLaren are getting considered for the constructors title. But in terms of Oscar, I mean, again, he's only a season and a half into his F1 career. Like, what are you sort of hoping to see from him from the final races of this season?
I used to say this actually that last year Oscar was a rookie that really didn't feel like a rookie. He kind of came in almost fully formed and very, very mature. And yeah, he's lacking experience compared to Lando. And I think one of the main criticisms was that he needs to work on his race pace compared to Lando as well, and his tire management. But the past few races he's been really on it, and I think he just needs to stay consistent and keep getting those P3s, P2s, maybe even another one like you said. And obviously we'll see what happens at Red Bull, but if Oscar and Lando keep being close, as was the case in Hungary, that could give McLaren a bit of a headache.
Mm-hmm. And just following on that, do you expect McLaren to maybe step in with the team orders? I mean, we've seen sort of the way teams do team orders very different up and down the grid. I'm thinking, obviously, you mentioned Red Bull there. It's very clear. And we saw an example in this race when Max was behind Sergio. They just said, Sergio, get in the pit, get out of the way. Like, we don't need you blocking Max kind of thing. Whereas teams like Mercedes as well are a bit more open with drivers racing each other. What do you predict McLaren are going to do as the races go on? Do you think they're going to sort of stay as they are now and say both drivers, or whoever's in the front has priority? Or do you think as the weeks go on and as the races get less and less and the points obviously unavailable get less and less, do you think they might start to lean towards Lando if he's anywhere near Max?
I think that's a possibility. Yeah, I think Zach Brown was talking about this, but I don't think he said they have a actual. He said something about how they have two number one drivers and they're all very ambitious, and I don't think they actually made a concrete decision yet, but they may very well be forced to if Lando. Well, I mean, Lando has emerged as the driver chasing Max essentially. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have a little short break and then we're going to come back and talk about Lando's race. Now let's talk about Lando. I mean, it's a similar story. It's something we've talked about a lot so far, but another poor start. And he's just, yeah, he goes wide into turn one, falls down the order, and it's just something very familiar, isn't it, Isha? Like we've seen him do this time and time again, and like it's just another poor start. I mean, I'm trying to think of a different way to say it, but we've seen this so often from him, unfortunately, haven't we?
Yes, that is true. It is difficult to oftentimes, support him over Oscar if it comes down to a 1v1 battle or something. But, Oscar's just been proving himself, doing great. Lando, I feel like, is sort of falling down the pack a little bit. He is second in the driver standings. However, he had his win earlier on in the season, and then since then, it just seems like he's struggling with something a little bit, whether that's, the start of the race. I think that is where the real issue lies, and I think that that's something that McLaren needs to have a conversation with him about, see how they can improve on that. I think the summer break is the best time to have this sort of conversation to improve the remainder of the season, because it could be important to him, if it does come down to the driver standings. So I think that, it is something he's been struggling with, and I think that's where he really needs to improve to finally start getting more wins possible.
And do you think it could maybe be a mental thing as well? Because I could be wrong, but I coming into this year, I don't remember having this bigger problem with starts. Maybe it was a case of he was starting further down the grid, so he didn't notice as much. And obviously, the races he's driving against now are a little bit higher level than. No offense to the midfield, but the
Mhm.
midfield drivers. Like, do you think there could be like a mental issue? Because we know that Lando is a guy. I don't want to say he's led by his emotions, but he's very self-critical of himself. He's, as we've seen, even
Mhm.
if he does a good qualifying lap, like he's still annoyed at himself. Do you think this is maybe in the back of his mind as he starts going off after the red lights?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a great thing to point out. I think that is a big part of it because, I don't know if emotional is the right word to use, but he is a bit of an emotional driver. And a lot of the times that does help you out as a driver. It gives you the anger and like the energy that you need to go on, but then sometimes it can hold you back. And I think at the start of the race, maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's, it's just him having conversations with himself, sitting at the start of the race, and then it just tends to not work out for him, and then he spends the rest of the race trying to make up for that initial mistake. So I think that is something that perhaps McLaren as a team can help him figure out and work out. But I think it really does come down to him and how he feels about his performances and his races and starts.
You mentioned that having to make up for a poor start. That was very much the case in this race. Like he gets stuck behind Carlos Sainz. He was one of the few drivers not to be on the medium. Carlos started on hard, and the problem for Lando is, as we've mentioned, it wasn't hugely easy to overtake on this circuit. And what it does is it just leaves Lando not a sitting duck, because obviously it had a good battle, but Max Verstappen comes flying up behind him. It wasn't the 2022 Max of where he went from P14 to P1 in about 5 laps, but Max is very much charging up the circuit, a track he absolutely loves. And essentially, we get this battle for the whole race of Max v Lando. And while we used to this season in particular like being up near the front, obviously now it's fighting for P5 and P6. Like it was a very weird to see those two. And essentially, they're sort of just trading blows going for it. So Red Bull go quite aggressive. They go to undercut Max in lap 15. And Lando obviously tries to react to that and also goes in. And then sort of the race just progresses nicely. And then I think this is another thing I wanted to bring up. Like Lando sort of went long to try and overcut Max or sort of have a bit of an advantage. And then McLaren chose to pit him quite early into the second stint. Like Magdalena, I could see you nodding your head. Like, were you surprised by that decision to sort of go long and then go so short again and basically wipe away any advantages that you yourself made?
Yeah, I think this is part of like a bigger issue. It's Lando and the starts, and then you mentioned the mental side of it. I think it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to build the fastest car, we're going to be front runners, and it's another to actually find yourself competing for wins and even for the championship this year, which is looking like a real possibility, at least in terms of constructors for McLaren. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a Ferrari situation where it's like, okay, we've got the car, we've got the drivers, but then the strategy goes awry, and it's he was on hards, I think, at that point, so no reason why he couldn't have gone longer. So that was a surprising call.
Mm. And ultimately, he finished P6. Obviously, moves up to P5 with Russell's disqualification. but behind Max crucially. So he loses out on more constructor, not constructor, sorry, driver standing points to Max. And just think about the weekend as the whole, Isha. Like, obviously, Max was coming to this race. We all know he's getting that grid penalty. He's starting 11th. I mean, it's been a long time since Max was that low down. Do you think this is a real missed opportunity for Lando? The fact that he hasn't, I mean, not only is he not outscored Max, like he didn't. I think we were probably expecting him to come and maybe get like a 10-point swing, and instead he's lost 2 more points. Is this a huge opportunity missed for Lando?
Yes, I think it is because I think that in the past few races, his real opponent has been Max. It's like when Max has some sort of disadvantage, that's when Lando can capitalize on that and use that to his advantage to take a win or to secure as many points as possible. And then this was like a good chance for him um, with Max starting in 11th. And then, Lando could have definitely taken a win here had he had a good start. But then again, it comes back to everything we've been talking about so far. I think it was definitely a missed opportunity, and I think this was his probably best chance to, do better than Max, but then once he let Max overtake him, after that, it's not impossible, but it's very, very difficult to take that back.
So just looking at the standings as a result after these races, obviously, but all the drivers get some more points. So as it stands, Max Verstappen in 277 points, obviously in first, Lando Norris 199, and Magdalena, that is quite a sizable gap, isn't it, going into the summer break? I mean, with the way the things are going, like Max hasn't lost a huge amount of points at all, really, in any of this race this season, barring Australia, obviously. Like, do you think that gap is too big now? I mean, when McLaren were doing so well, and when Lando was getting obviously the wins in Miami and then the P2s and stuff like that, there was a real sense that okay, he might be able to do that. But this little stumble, is it too reactionary to say the title race is over, or do you think there is maybe something in that?
Um, it depends. I mean, Red Bull have been off their game. Max has been flattering the car, I think, in recent rounds. Um, but even he is unhappy. I think he was after this race, he was like, okay, whatever. But there's this expectation, I think, after the qualifying, and it was like, oh, he has a penalty. Oh, but he'll probably just do what he did last year, and he was predicted to be on the podium, and maybe he'll even win. And then Max himself comes out and says, "No, we don't have the car to be able to do that anymore." Um, so I guess it depends as well how if Red Bull keeps, if McLaren beats them at the development game, then the max factor at some point won't be enough. I think for now he's secure in the drivers championship, but I think it could be all to play for in the second half in terms of constructors.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, McLaren scored 28 points this weekend, more than any other team, obviously, with Mercedes losing out some there. So, constructors as they stand, Red Bull on at 408 and then McLaren on 366. Ferrari, I mean, they're still in it. They haven't done much, obviously, the podium today. 345 points, but I think we all sort of expect McLaren v Red Bull. Like, Isha, we'll get on to Perez in a minute because obviously he's going to have a huge impact on this. But just going into the second half of the season after the summer break, which way do you see the constructors going? Like as Magdalena said, Red Bull aren't in the best runs of form. McLaren seem to have the stronger car. Yet, I think every McLaren fan listening, there's somebody in the back of their mind saying, "We can't do this. Like we can't topple Red Bull."
Yeah. No, I think it's going to go in the favor of McLaren. Mostly because for McLaren you've got these two drivers that are consistently scoring a good amount of points. And then with Red Bull, Max Verstappen usually is the top scorer runner. And then with Checo, it's very difficult because sometimes he'll have a good performance and then other times he won't be able to score any points. So it's really just Max bringing in all those points, whereas McLaren has two great drivers bringing in multiple points each race and performing pretty well. So I think that, after the summer break, I think it's going to swing towards McLaren's favor. But that also depends a lot on Checo's performance for the remainder of the season.
I mean, that's a great segue. We'll have to take a short break and then we're going to have some look at some more results up and down the grid, including Sergio Perez. So we're back for the final part of the show today, and we'll just have a quick look at other notable results. I mean, there's one obvious place to start. Sergio Perez started qualified on the front row, which I think everyone was surprised at considering his qualifying form so far this year. Still quite a way off Max, about over half a second. So clearly not getting the maximum out of the car, but much better than what we saw. And yet he ends in 7th or even 8th before the disqualification. Like Magdalena, like is this Perez's last race for Red Bull? I mean, the chances that he's had so far, he's got to run out alive soon.
Yeah, I think his time might have come. We might be saying goodbye to Sergio Perez at Red Bull soon. Um, I think the comments after the race from Christian Horner were quite telling. Um, I think he's always been very much in Perez's corner, and he was always his supporter, and he gave him all these chances to keep stepping it up. And while last year, given Red Bull's dominance, that was kind of acceptable to keep him on because Max was doing most of the heavy lifting. I think this year, coming under serious threat from McLaren, it won't be enough. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see. We might be coming into the race after the break into the Netherlands, and Red Bull has a new driver, and I think go on.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to come in with Perez's comments because he
Hmm.
was very snappy. I mean, like, it's not often that Perez gets annoyed, but he said, yesterday I had a good qualifying, a good day. It doesn't change anything. Obviously, this isn't speaking about his future. I think we have too much going on in the team, a lot of things that we have to focus on, and we cannot waste any energy with all this speculation around it. So this is the last time I'll speak about the future. To make it clear for everyone, I will not be speaking anymore. I will not answer any more questions on the future, which is I mean, I don't call it a strop, but that's quite clearly him saying it's showing the signs of someone who's under pressure. Nisha, do you sort of agree that this might be the last we've seen of Perez in a Red Bull suit?
Yes, I agree. I think that, he's had enough chances this season to prove himself, and I think that it's just he's on, the downhill side of his, I guess, performance with Red Bull and his career with Red Bull. So I think that Red Bull has some other drivers that they can take a look at. Some drivers right now who are available on the market, some drivers in Formula 2 that they could pull up. So I think that considering how the other teams, especially McLaren and Mercedes and Ferrari, are suddenly now performing so much better than they did last season, I think that it's important for them to pick a second driver now who can, if not equal Max, but be very near him and be able to score and bring in more points to the team.
And who do we think is most likely to get that seat? Because obviously there's a few different options. I can run you through them. So obviously you got Liam Lawson, who everyone will know, sort of came in. It's a Red Bull junior. Came in last season when Ricardo broke his hand. Did very well. You've obviously got Daniel Ricciardo, who's at V Carb, and he's doing okay. He's had a bit of a pickup in form. Didn't have a great start to the season. Obviously, he did get a point as a result of Russell's DQ. Then we've got Yuki Tsunoda as well, who's just a driver who's done well, but never seems to be in the conversation for actually moving up to Red Bull. And then maybe not as an immediate replacement, but in something like 2025, you could have someone like Carlos Sainz, who obviously still hasn't signed a new deal. Magdalena, if you had to guess who would be in that Red Bull seat alongside Max come the Netherlands, which driver do you think it will be?
I think Daniel Ricciardo is the most probable option. It would be interesting to see that reunion between Verstappen and Ricardo, because I think there's been online it's been like a topic of continuous speculation of, okay, was the Red Bull essentially, well, not the only car, but the best suited to Ricardo's abilities? What happened to Ricardo after Red Bull? Will he be back on it if he, gets back inside the car and the team that he saw the most success with? So that's probably the most likely option. Tsunoda would be a great option, but as you said, for some reason he is never in serious contention. So yeah, I think they're finally going to give Ricardo that chance.
Yeah, I will lead the Yuki Tsunoda fan club till my dying day. I think he's one of the most underrated drivers on the grid. What about you, Isha? Who do you think might get that seat? Do you think Ricardo as well?
Um, I don't know. I think it's tough. I would personally really like to see Carlos Sainz in that seat. I think he could do a great job with that Red Bull, but I don't think that's likely. I don't think the team is looking at him as a possible option. I think that Yuki Tsunoda, as you both pointed out, is just overlooked. I don't think he's in the contention either. I think Daniel Ricciardo is a very popular option. He's a fan favorite. But I'm just really not sure about how his performance in Red Bull could seem because so far, he's had chances, he's had opportunities, and I don't think he's made the most of them. So I think giving him another chance in Red Bull might allow him to perform even better, but I think it could also go downhill. So personally, I think that Liam Lawson is a good option, and I think that if they're going to be looking at a new driver, you might as well pick somebody completely new and, run with him for a year or two and see how that pans out.
That's interesting. Yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye on that over the next few weeks. I want to ask you one final question on Red Bull. If Sergio Perez stays in the seat, I'll ask it to both of you. Does McLaren win the world title? I'm going to go with you, Isha, first.
Oh, that's a really tough question. I think that if Checo stays, I think McLaren's gonna take the title. I think so.
And what about you, Magdalena?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about some other teams then. I want the final thing I want to talk about is sort of the pecking order in F1 because I don't know about you guys, but like so far this season, like it's been so varied. We've had so many different winners. It's been a real season of this team's good, and now this team's good, and now this team's good. Like going into the second half of the season, who do we think is going to be like the best place to sort of win races? Probably not win the world championship because, like you said, there's a lot of points already on the board, and it's sort of McLaren and Red Bull maybe the favourites for that. But we've already seen from teams like Mercedes who've somehow won 3 of the last 4 races. I don't quite know how that's happened, but it has happened. Like, and then obviously we had Ferrari at the start of the season quite well. Like, if I could get your like top 4 in like pecking order wise, who are you ranking sort of for the rest of the season? So Magdalena, I'll start with you. Like let's go 1 to 4 of who you think is going to be the strongest team for the rest of the year.
McLaren probably if they keep this up. Gosh, it's hard because there's so much fluctuation. I mean, the conservative answer would be Red Bull, and mm, and then Mercedes and then Ferrari. Although as a Ferrari fan, you want to see them finally get it right. I mean, they reversed their fortunes last year, the second half of the season. So we'll see if they can find an answer to their issues. But I mean, Mercedes today, I don't think anyone was expecting that. So they still got a lot to show.
Yeah, I think even Toto Wolff wasn't expecting it. He seemed very shocked in the paddock after all. What about you, Issa? What's your top 4 for the rest of the year?
I've got to say, you took the words right out of my mouth. I would have given McLaren number 1, obviously because both drivers are very strong, and so far they haven't managed to mess up their strategies too poorly. I feel like last race was a one-time event. And then after that, I've got to give it to Red Bull because Max is a one-man show. And even if it's been a little up and down, I think that he's still got a great season ahead of him. Third, as a Ferrari fan, I would have really wanted to give to them, but I think that Mercedes has got 3 wins, right, so far this season already. Ferrari tends to often mess up their strategies, and we all know that. So I think the 3rd spot has to go to Mercedes, and then, copying you, 4th goes to Ferrari.
Okay, we'll wait and see if that transpires. So last thing we'll talk about is let's look back at the season we've had so far. I mean, I can't remember. I forget off the top of my head how many races we've had, but we're good stretching of the season now. Like, how do we reflect on McLaren so far? I mean, just a little recap. They had a bit of a slow start, but slowly started to become one of the best teams on the grid. Like, Issa, looking back, if you had to rank or like rate or grade, McLaren's season so far, maybe out of 10, where are you putting them? What are you giving them so far?
For this season, out of 10, I don't know. I think that's really tricky. I think they've had a great season, definitely way better than last year was. Um, I feel like it really depends on how the second half goes. Maybe I'd put them at maybe like a 4 so far.
Out of 10?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. No. Sorry, my brain's working the wrong way. I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay. I was like,
yeah.
wow, that is very
I'm
harsh.
so sorry.
High
No, I take
standards.
that back. I would give them out of a 10. I'd give them a 7.5.
Okay, that seems I was sorry.
Yeah.
I was shocked.
So
Absolutely
sorry. Thank you for
shocked at
catching
that.
that.
I was like, did she think out of 5? But okay, wow. Okay. Magdalena, what you got? Hopefully not a 4 out of 10. but what
No,
are you
no,
saying?
I was thinking a 7 as well. I mean, they turned both of their drivers into first-time Grand Prix winners. They're in the title race, at least in the constructors. There's still room for growth, like with the strategies, and the messy kind of they need to figure out their situation. Like last time out in Hungary, the public mess with the team orders and the why did they pit, Lando, and then Oscar was, everyone wants to win. They will need to figure that out if they want to get serious. So there's still room for growth. But yeah, a strong 7.
Perfect. I mean, that's an absolute ideal way to end it for this first half of the season. Go off and enjoy a bit of a summer break. I think the drivers are always quite tired by this point of the season. Hopefully come back very rejuvenated, as we will do as well. In the meantime, thanks to both of you for joining me today. And yeah, hopefully enjoy the rest of your days. Thanks for listening to today's show. My thanks again go to Magdalena and Esha for joining me. With F1 taking a well-earned break, we'll be off for some time too. But in the meantime, we're going to have some special shows landing in your feed, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss them. Other than that, you can follow us on socials at Pondering Papaya, and we'll speak to you again very soon.